How much longer, no matter the aid the West provides, can Ukraine possibly last in this war against Russia?
You know, people criticize me and say, well, you said this was over. It's been over for a long time. The Russians have simply decided to wait in the hopes of two things: negotiations, which obviously haven't worked, and secondly, that the economies in Europe would crash. And I think they're on their way. They're not only headed into serious recession, but we're now headed into a winter. The oil and gas problem is enormous. I think the EU is in trouble. So I think from the Russian standpoint, well, let's wait a little longer and watch this thing collapse, because they really don't want to kill any more people. Remember, Putin is different from us. Putin wants to live with the West. He wants to live with the Ukrainians. We have said we do not want to live with Mr. Putin.
Right.
That's the problem.
Mr. Stoltenberg, NATO has been vocal in identifying China as a threat. The Vilnius Summit Declaration states that China is trying to subvert the so-called rules-based international order and criticises China for being opaque about its strategy and intentions. Now, my first question is, how is it possible to subvert an order that has no constitution, no basis whatsoever in international law? And if you think it does, in fact, appeal to or have a standing in international law, why then do NATO and NATO members repeatedly violate international law without any consequence? Yugoslavia, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, for example. China has not illegally invaded and bombed a sovereign country in over 40 years, while the US and our allies have hardly stopped in the same period, killing millions of civilians, displacing millions more, and illegally sanctioning dozens of countries to the point where tens of thousands of men, women and children are extrajudicially executed each year for simply existing in a country targeted by Western imperialism. Is it not time to return to multilateral international forums based on diplomacy and international law, like China has repeatedly urged the US to do?
We don't regard China as an adversary, but we are concerned about the challenges that China poses to our values, to our interests, and to our security. China doesn't share our values. They don't believe in freedom of speech, democratic values, and they have expressed that quite clearly. They crack down on journalists, on opposition, on dissidents across the country. We have seen how they have cracked down on democratic rights in Hong Kong. We see how they are threatening Taiwan, and we see how China is investing heavily in modern nuclear weapons, more military capabilities, and also long-range missiles, and how they also work more and more closer together with Russia.
Ukraine is sending out letters to these men who fled to other parts of Europe now, saying, we know where you are. Here's a letter. We found you. We know exactly where you are. Come back to fight for us or face arrest. Here's a young Ukrainian man today who just received this letter in the mail. And I'll translate. He says, friends, in short time, I don't know what to do.
F word.
In short, I just received this letter in his hand. Here it is. It has my photo on the paper. I translated it, he says. It says that Ukraine has sent a request. According to the Ukrainian authorities, I entered the territory of the European Union illegally. Although I was traveling legally, he says, I entered legally. I didn't buy any certificates. Here, he says, I told you how I left. And it says here, I have to leave the European Union within 2 weeks. I have to leave Europe within 2 weeks. That's it. Otherwise, I'll be forcibly exiled to the territory of Ukraine. I don't even know what to do, he says. Maybe you could tell me in the comments.